The loggers found the skull first, then realized it was small, too small. And that's when the true horror began. April 1985, Campbell County, Tennessee. Remote woods above Elk Valley, accessible only by four-wheel drive on a rutted coal-hauling road called Sand Gap Road. This wasn't a place you stumbled into by accident. Someone had to know it was there. Someone had to deliberately drive up that mountain, far from prying eyes, bouncing over rocks and through creek beds, to dump what they'd done where no one would ever look. A child's skull, partially buried in the red Tennessee clay. Scattered nearby in the leaf litter, finger bones, ribs, fragments of vertebrae, 2 high-top sneakers size 5 or 6, canvas worn but still recognizable, a cheap plastic necklace with colored beads, and silence, the kind that presses on your eardrums until you hear your own heartbeat. Dr. Bill Bass from the University of Tennessee's Body Farm examined the remains with the careful precision that had made him a legend in forensic anthropology. Female, age 9 to 15, dead at least a year, possibly longer. Good dental work. Someone had cared for her once, taken her to a dentist, filled cavities, maintained her health. But no one was looking for her. No missing persons reports matched her description. It was as if she'd never existed, as if she'd been erased. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation called her Baby Girl because she deserved a name, even if they didn't know it. They wrote to 50 dentists across Kentucky, Tennessee, and North Carolina, hoping someone would recognize the dental work, the specific pattern of fillings. Silence. They checked every missing child report within 200 miles, then 300, then across the entire Southeast. Nothing matched. They released sketches of what she might have looked like based on skull reconstruction. No one called. Here's what they did find. Isotopic testing of her remains showed she hadn't grown up in Tennessee. The mineral content in her bones, the signature of the water she'd drunk, the food she'd eaten, it all pointed elsewhere. Somewhere they couldn't pinpoint. Somewhere north, maybe. Somewhere with different geology, different water sources. She was a stranger, dumped in woods so isolated the nearest human being lived miles down the mountain. Investigators kept her skull in evidence storage. They kept her necklace, the cloth fragments animals hadn't dragged away, the sneakers. They waited. For nearly 40 years, they waited for someone to come forward, for technology to catch up, for a break that seemed like it would never come. Then in 2022, advanced DNA technology and genetic genealogy gave them an answer. Tracy Sue Walker, 15, from Lafayette, Indiana, missing since June 1978. 7 years before her bones turned up 400 miles away in those Campbell County woods. But the answer only deepened the horror, opened new wounds, created more questions than it solved. How did Tracy get from Indiana to Tennessee? The distance alone suggests planning, transportation, intent. Someone drove her across state lines, either while she was alive and terrified, or already dead and wrapped in something that left no forensic trace. How long had she been dead before she was buried on that mountain? The decomposition suggested at least a year, possibly longer. Who knew about that impossibly remote logging road? And why did no one in Elk Valley, a tight-knit Appalachian community where everybody knows everybody, where strangers stand out like neon signs, ever see a young girl who didn't belong? TBI Special Agent Brandon Elkins has worked the case for years. Secrets tend to stay in the hills, he said in a 2022 interview. Appalachian communities are close, they protect their own. We need help. Someone knows something. Think about it, for Tracy to end up where she did, someone had to know that logging road intimately. Someone who could navigate it in the dark or in bad weather, who understood the terrain, who knew exactly how remote it was, who knew that loggers might not come through for months or even years. This wasn't random. This wasn't panic. This was calculated. This was someone who'd thought about where to hide a body, someone who'd maybe done it before. And here's the truly chilling part. Tracy wasn't the only one. In January 1985, just 3 months before Tracy's skull was discovered, another young woman was found dead on I-75 near Jellicoe, just miles from where Tracy lay buried. Strangled, pregnant, unidentified. The area became a dumping ground for what investigators called the Redhead Murders, a series of unsolved killings of young women with reddish hair found along interstates throughout the 1980s. Victims discovered in Tennessee, Arkansas, Kentucky, Mississippi, Pennsylvania. Some identified eventually, most still nameless. Tracy had light brown hair. She didn't fit the pattern, which means whoever killed her might have been someone else entirely. Or it means the pattern was broader than investigators realized. Someone who knew the back roads, someone who traveled, someone who understood how to make young girls disappear. Tracy's mother, Pat Walker, had spent 44 years not knowing what happened to her daughter. Tracy had simply vanished one summer day in Lafayette. No body, no leads, no closure, just gone. When Agent Elkins called Pat in 2022 to tell her they'd identified Tracy's remains, Pat finally had an answer. But closure? That's harder. Because Tracy's killer has never been identified, DNA from the remains couldn't be matched to anyone in the system. Whoever buried her on that mountain either had no criminal record, or they died before DNA databases became comprehensive, or they're still out there, still walking free. Campbell County locals don't talk about it much. The older residents remember when the skull was found, caused quite a stir back in '85. But then it went cold, and people stopped thinking about baby girl buried up in those woods. Now that she has a name, there's been renewed interest. Someone must remember something. A vehicle seen where it shouldn't be, a local man who disappeared for days with no explanation, a stranger passing through who gave people the creeps. But Appalachia keeps its secrets. The mountains hide what they want to hide. Tracy Sue Walker was 15 years old when someone took her life and dumped her in woods so remote it took 7 years for anyone to find her. She was someone's daughter, someone's friend, someone who had dreams and fears and a whole life ahead of her. She deserved better than an unmarked grave on a mountain no one visits. Her case is solved, technically. We know her name now, we know where she's from, we know she's finally going home to Indiana for proper burial next to family who never stopped looking for her. But we don't know who killed her. And somewhere in Campbell County, or Lafayette, or somewhere in between, somewhere a killer once lived, or still lives, or died without ever confessing, there are answers. Maybe buried in an old diary, maybe hidden in someone's memory, maybe written in a letter never sent, locked in an attic trunk, waiting to be found. Someone knows what happened to Tracy Sue Walker. They've known for 47 years. They've kept that secret, carried that weight, looked at themselves in the mirror every morning knowing what they did. Maybe they have children of their own now, grandchildren. Maybe they've lived a normal life, hidden in plain sight, protected by time and silence. And they're still keeping it. The bloodhound stopped at the crest and began howling, circles, confusion, as if Polly Melton had simply ceased to exist. September 25, 1981, Deep Creek Trail in the Great Smoky Mountains. 58-year-old Polly was hiking with two friends, Red and Trula, on a trail she'd walked for nearly 20 years. The afternoon was mild, the path crowded with other hikers enjoying the fall colors. Normal, safe, familiar. Except Polly was walking slower than usual that day. Her friends teased her about it. Where was her energy? She'd been acting strange all week, skipping her regular volunteer shift at the hospital without explanation, making mysterious phone calls that Bob, her husband, couldn't quite track. But then, around 4 p.m., something changed. Suddenly, Polly picked up her pace, almost rushed. Her friends called out, "I wouldn't want to be in a foot race with you, Polly." She turned back, laughed, and kept going, fast, determined. They watched her disappear over a small hill on the gravel path. When her friends crested that same hill 30 seconds later, Polly was gone. No sign of her at the bench where hikers usually rested. No glimpse of her tan polyester pants or pink-striped blouse further down the trail. They walked faster, calling her name, assuming she'd headed back to the campground where Bob waited in their Airstream trailer. The trail wasn't long, just a pleasant afternoon walk. There were other hikers everywhere. Someone must have seen her. But when they arrived at the campground at 4:30 p.m., Bob was alone, reading in the trailer. He hadn't seen Polly since she left to hike around 3 p.m. By 6 p.m., park rangers launched a search. By morning, it became one of the largest operations in Smoky Mountains history. Bloodhounds arrived at the spot where Polly had vanished. The dogs sniffed her scent on the trail, followed it to the crest of that small hill, and then began howling in confusion. They couldn't pick up her scent beyond that point. It was as if she'd evaporated into thin air. The search expanded. Hundreds of volunteers, helicopters, thermal imaging, ground-penetrating radar. Nothing. No footprints leaving the trail. No torn fabric on branches. No body in the creek below. No disturbance in the undergrowth. Polly was a 2-pack-a-day smoker with high blood pressure and a bad back, not exactly built for cross-country sprinting through the snake-infested woods she famously feared. Here's where it gets stranger. Polly had cigarettes with her, but no money, no identification, no medication she desperately needed for her blood pressure. She wasn't allowed to drive that summer due to health issues, so she had no car keys. She'd left everything valuable back at the trailer. The only thing she wore of any worth was her wedding ring. The day before she vanished, she made a mysterious phone call to someone no one in her family could identify. Her minister later confided to investigators that he suspected an affair, though no proof ever surfaced. Bob had seemed distant lately, worried about Polly's health and behavior. After Polly disappeared, searchers noticed something odd. Bob's prescription bottle of Valium had gone missing from the trailer. The official search ended October 2nd with no trace of Polly Melton. That same night, Bob suffered a devastating stroke. He spent the rest of his life in a nursing home, unable to speak, unable to answer questions about that day. He died never knowing what happened to his wife of 35 years. But the questions remained. So what happened on Deep Creek Trail? Some theorize Polly planned her escape, met a lover at a crossroads, started a new life somewhere far from Jacksonville, Florida. But she left everything behind. Clothes, medicine she desperately needed, her entire identity, her social security benefits. How do you start over at 58 with nothing but the clothes on your back and a pack of cigarettes? And why speed up right before vanishing, as if rushing toward something? Others think abduction, though how someone could snatch a 5'11", 170-pound woman from a crowded trail in broad daylight without witnesses seems impossible. The trail was busy that afternoon. Multiple hikers passed through. No one saw a struggle. No one heard screams. No one noticed a vehicle parked suspiciously nearby. The most disturbing theory? That the mountains themselves took her. Locals who've lived in the Smokies for generations whisper about the silent woods places where the forest goes completely quiet, where people walk in and never walk out. Ancient Cherokee stories speak of portals, thin places where our world touches something else. Some hikers report feeling watched on certain trails, hearing footsteps that match their own pace, seeing shadows that don't belong. Here's what haunts me most about Polly's case. She sped up right before she vanished, like something was pulling her forward, like she saw something over that hill that made her hurry. Maybe someone she recognized, maybe something she'd been looking for all along, maybe something none of us can see or understand. And whatever it was, it took her somewhere none of us can follow. The crack in the sole of her left shoe would have left distinctive footprints, a unique pattern searchers knew to look for. They mapped every inch of that trail for weeks. They never found a single print, not one. It's as if Polly walked to the crest of that hill and simply stepped out of our reality. Her case remains open. Every few years, someone reports seeing an older woman matching Polly's description in some distant town: Nevada, California, Montana. Each lead goes nowhere, because Polly Melton isn't living under a new name in some desert town. She's still in those mountains. The bloodhounds knew it. They howled because they'd reached the edge of something they couldn't cross, a boundary, a threshold, a place where Polly's scent simply ceased to exist in our world. And sometimes on quiet afternoons in September, hikers on Deep Creek Trail report a strange sensation near that same hill. A sudden chill, the overwhelming urge to walk faster, to hurry forward, to see what's just over the crest. Most resist. They turn back, unsettled, unable to explain the pull they felt. Park rangers don't like talking about it, but there's an unofficial list they keep. People who've reported unusual experiences on that exact section of trail. A woman in 1995 who swore she saw Polly walking ahead of her, pink blouse visible through the trees, always just out of reach. A man in 2003 who heard someone calling his name in a woman's voice, beckoning him off trail. A group of college students in 2017 who all simultaneously felt the urge to run, to sprint over that hill, and had to physically hold each other back from doing it. The Cherokee people who lived in these mountains for thousands of years had stories about places like this. Thin places, they called them, spots where the membrane between worlds grows fragile, where spirits can cross, where the living can slip through if they're not careful. The elders warned their children, if you feel the pull, if something calls your name, if you see someone you recognize but something feels wrong, turn around, walk away, don't look back. But Polly Melton didn't know those stories. Or maybe she did, and she walked toward it anyway. Maybe whatever was calling her was stronger than fear. Maybe it wore a familiar face. Maybe it promised something she desperately wanted. Escape, peace, another chance, a different life. Her daughter still lives in Jacksonville, Florida. She's in her 70s now, never got closure, never understood what happened to her mother that autumn afternoon. Every September 25th, she drives to the Smokies, walks that same trail, stands at the crest of that hill where her mother vanished, and waits, hoping for a sign, hoping for an answer, hoping her mother might somehow walk back over that hill and explain where she's been all these years. But Polly never comes. The hill keeps its secret, and the bloodhounds still won't cross that spot even 43 years later. They circle, whine, pull back on their leashes. They know something humans can't see. They know that some thresholds once crossed don't lead back. The tracking dogs picked up Trenny Gibson's scent near Klingman's Dome Tower, followed it for a mile and a half down the road, then stopped abruptly, confused as if she'd gotten into a vehicle and simply driven away from her own life. October 8, 1976. Trenny Lynn Gibson, 16, joined her Bearden High School class on a field trip to the Great Smoky Mountains. Horticultural students, about 40 of them, hiking to Andrews Bald from Klingman's Dome. The weather was dreary but manageable, cool, overcast but not dangerous. Trenny wore a borrowed brown plaid jacket from her friend, a blue striped sweater, blue jeans, blue Adidas shoes with white stripes, and an expensive ring her father had given her, a diamond and star sapphire ring she never took off. The group was spread out along the trail, some students ahead, some behind, teachers scattered throughout, a constant flow of hikers all around. Not isolated, not alone, not the kind of place where someone should be able to vanish without a trace. That's what makes it so impossible, so wrong, so haunting. Around 3 p.m., during the hike back toward the buses, Trenny's friends stopped to rest on some rocks near the intersection with the Appalachian Trail. They were tired, chatting, taking their time. But Trenny didn't stop. Trenny went on, one classmate later told investigators, seemed to be in a hurry to get back. Another student thought maybe she tried to cut cross-country toward the parking area to save time. The buses were leaving at 3:30 p.m. That was the last time anyone saw Trenny Lynn Gibson. When the buses departed at 3:30 p.m., Trenny wasn't on hers. Teachers did a head count. Panic set in immediately. This wasn't a student running off to smoke or causing trouble. Trenny was responsible, quiet, well-liked. She wouldn't just wander off. Teachers and chaperones searched the immediate area, calling her name, checking restrooms, asking other hikers if they'd seen a teenage girl in a brown jacket. Nothing. Rangers were notified within hours. By the next morning, hundreds of volunteers combed the area with bloodhounds, German shepherds, search and rescue teams from 3 states. The bloodhounds picked up Trenny's scent at the intersection with the Appalachian Trail, right where her friends last saw her. The dogs followed it along the roadside, parallel to Klingman's Dome Road, for over a mile. Then the scent just stopped, vanished, like Trenny had gotten into a car or been pulled into one. But there was more. Details that don't fit. Details that investigators quietly noted but couldn't explain. Near where Trenny was last seen, searchers found broken ferns, fresh breaks, as if someone had walked off trail or there'd been a struggle. 3 cigarette butts, not weathered, recently smoked. a partially consumed can of beer still cold to the touch. The next day, they found 8 more cigarette butts of the same brand, Marlboro Reds, at the spot where the dogs lost Trenny's scent. Someone had been waiting there, smoking, drinking, patient. The search continued for weeks. Over 750 people walked every trail, every drainage, every ravine in that area. They used helicopters, infrared technology, cadaver dogs. Park rangers checked every overlook, every parking area, every campground. They found nothing. No clothing, no jewelry, no scrap of the brown jacket or blue jeans, no sign of the distinctive ring. Trenny was 5'3", 115 pounds, small enough to be overpowered. But on a busy trail in the middle of a school group in broad daylight? Her father, Robert Gibson, was devastated. He organized additional searches on his own, spending every weekend in those mountains for months, then years. He walked every trail within 10 miles. He hired private investigators. He never gave up. He died in 2020 without ever knowing what happened to his daughter. Theories multiplied over the years. Some thought Trenny fell into an undiscovered crevice. The Smokies are riddled with caves and sinkholes hidden beneath vegetation. But searchers used ground-penetrating radar and found nothing. Others suspected abduction, though the timeline seemed impossible. Trenny vanished somewhere between 3 p.m. and 3:30 p.m., a window of just 30 minutes. During that window, she should have been visible to other hikers, other students, her teachers. So how did she disappear so completely? Here's another disturbing detail. Trenny's scent dog, yes, she had her own dog with the group, a beagle named Blue, was later found miles away from where Trenny vanished, exhausted and distressed, as if it had been chasing something or someone for hours. The dog had somehow gotten separated from the group and had run in a completely different direction from where the tracking dogs picked up Trenny's scent. What was Blue chasing? What did that dog see or smell that made it run for miles? In 2021, a hiker on the Appalachian Trail reported finding a star sapphire stone near Clingman's Dome. The find made headlines. Could it be from Trenny's ring? The stone was turned over to the FBI for analysis. They determined it wasn't related to Trenny's case. Wrong type of sapphire, wrong setting. But the hope, for a moment, had been real. What haunts investigators is the timeline and the cigarette butts. Someone was near where Trenny vanished, smoking, waiting. Then someone was a mile down the road smoking again, right where Trenny's scent ended. Someone patient, someone who knew the area, someone who blended in so well that 40 teenagers and multiple teachers never noticed anything wrong, never saw anything suspicious. Trenny would be 64 years old now. For 48 years, her family has waited for answers. For 48 years, those mountains have kept their secret. Her mother, now in her 80s, still hopes for closure before she dies, still hopes someone will come forward with information, a confession, a location. But secrets have a way of staying buried in the Smokies. The mountains are ancient, patient, indifferent to human suffering. They've swallowed hikers before. Dennis Martin, a 6-year-old who vanished in 1969 and was never found. Thelma Pauline Melton in 1981. Dozens of others over the decades. Some cases eventually solved, most not. Here's what keeps me up at night about Trenny's case. Those cigarette butts, the broken ferns, the beer can, the scent trail that ended at a road. These aren't signs of an accident or a fall. These are signs of something deliberate. Someone waiting. Someone watching teenage girls on a school trip, picking one who walked ahead of her friends, one who was alone for just a moment. And that person took their time. They smoked 11 cigarettes while they waited and watched and planned. They knew the area well enough to know where to park, where to intercept, where to disappear. They knew that the sound of wind through the trees would cover any sounds of struggle. They knew that on a busy October day with hundreds of tourists, one more car on Clingman's Dome Road wouldn't raise suspicion. They were patient. They were prepared. And they got away with it. Somewhere in the Smokies, Trenny Gibson is waiting to be found. And somewhere, maybe in Tennessee, maybe long dead, maybe still living with the weight of what they did, someone knows exactly where she is. They've known for 48 years, and they're not telling. The dog was found first. Taj, a golden retriever wandering Shenandoah trails alone, traumatized. refusing to return to where his owners had camped by the peaceful mountain stream, where something unspeakable had happened. May 19, 1996. Julie Williams, 24, and Lolly Winans, 26, set out on what should have been a perfect backpacking trip. They'd met 2 years earlier through Woods Women, a non-profit focused on outdoor education and empowerment for women. They fell in love in the wilderness, bonding over their shared passion for hiking, environmental justice, and the raw beauty of Appalachian trails. Julie was brilliant. Summa cum laude from the University of Minnesota, fluent in Spanish, passionate about geology and social justice. She'd spent time in Guatemala studying volcanoes, teaching English to rural communities. She had plans to return, to make a difference, to live a life that mattered. Lolly was a free spirit from a wealthy Michigan family who'd rejected privilege for wilderness guiding, microbrew drinking adventures in the woods, and a life lived on her own terms. She was funny, irreverent, loyal. She'd worked as a backcountry ranger in the Smokies. She knew how to survive in the wilderness. She knew how to read trails, weather, danger signs. Together, they were planning their future. Jobs lined up in Vermont for the summer, dreams of opening their own outdoor education program, maybe getting married if it ever became legal. They were happy. They were in love. They thought the wilderness was safe. They pitched their tent off the bridle trail in Shenandoah National Park, near a stream in a spot called Skyland. The location was isolated, but not dangerously so, just a quarter mile from Skyline Drive, half a mile from Skyland Lodge, where tourists ate dinner and watched the sunset. Close enough to civilization, remote enough for privacy. The sound of the stream burbling over rocks would have been peaceful, soothing. It would also have masked approaching footsteps. That detail haunts the investigation. They were due back May 28th for their summer jobs. When they didn't return, Julie's father reported them missing May 31st. Rangers found their red Volkswagen Fox in the Skyland parking lot. Then they found Taj wandering the trails, distressed, his leash dragging. Then, on June 1st, they found the women. Julie's body was in a sleeping bag about 40 feet from the tent, partway down an embankment toward the stream, as if she'd been dragged there. Lolly was inside the tent. Both were bound with duct tape, gagged, throats slit with something sharp, a knife, investigators believed, though the weapon was never recovered. Partially undressed but not sexually assaulted, at least no semen was found, though the positioning of their bodies and clothing suggested sexual motivation. Here's what made it even more horrifying. The duct tape over Julie's mouth had been removed and used to bind Lolly, suggesting the killer spent time at the scene, suggesting control, deliberation, suggesting this wasn't a frenzied attack but something methodical, something the killer took his time with, maybe hours. The killer had used their own duct tape, brought with him or found in their gear, to bind them. He'd used their tent as his crime scene. He'd left them there for the stream to sing over, for Taj to find, for the wilderness they loved to witness. For 28 years, the case haunted investigators and terrified the hiking community. In 2002, they indicted Darrell David Rice, who'd been convicted of attempted abduction of a woman in the park in 1997. He'd grabbed a female cyclist, tried to force her into the woods, but she fought back and escaped. Attorney General John Ashcroft announced the charges as a hate crime. Julie and Lolly were openly lesbian, and prosecutors claimed Rice had stated women like them deserved to die for their sexuality. The LGBT community rallied. This was bigger than two murders. It was an attack on their right to exist, to love, to be safe in public spaces. The trial was supposed to bring justice, closure, answers. But in 2004, DNA evidence exonerated Rice. The charges were dropped. 15 days later, Rice died in a car accident, a coincidence that fed conspiracy theories for years. His name was forever tainted by a crime he didn't commit. For 20 more years, the case went cold. Julie and Lolly's families grieved without answers. The camping spot was closed, became a memorial, a warning. Hikers avoided it, claimed it felt wrong, heavy, haunted. Then, in June 2024, advanced DNA testing finally identified the killer. Walter Leo Jackson Sr., a convicted serial rapist from Cleveland, Ohio. He was a residential painter and an avid hiker known to frequent Shenandoah National Park. He had a history of violence against women, kidnapping, rape, assault. He knew the park intimately, had hiked its trails for years. He died in prison in 2018, serving time for other crimes, having never been connected to the murders. The FBI announced the breakthrough with relief. Case closed. Families could finally grieve properly. But here's what the FBI won't say publicly, what investigators whisper off the record. What else did Leo Jackson do? He was known to alter license plates frequently, use temporary tags, swap vehicles. He had a documented history of traveling along the East Coast, staying in cheap motels, moving constantly. He'd been arrested multiple times in different states for assault, kidnapping attempts, rape. He knew how to hunt women in isolated areas. He'd done it before, he'd do it again. And he frequented national parks. Specifically, he frequented Shenandoah. So here's the horrifying question. How many other women did Leo Jackson kill in those woods? How many other campsites became crime scenes? How many other hikers met him on a trail, thought he seemed friendly, maybe shared a campfire, and never made it home? The investigation is ongoing. They're looking at Jackson's movements through the years, cross-referencing unsolved cases, checking missing persons reports from the 1980s and 1990s, examining cold cases from Virginia, Maryland, West Virginia, Pennsylvania. They're excavating his past, his patterns, his hunting grounds. But Julie and Lolly didn't know any of that on May 19th when they set up their tent by that beautiful stream. They didn't know that someone was watching, someone who'd done this before, someone who selected his victims carefully, isolated campsites, women alone or in pairs, locations where the sound of water would cover screams. Their last photograph shows them happy, hiking, alive, in love. Julie's arm around Lolly's shoulders, Taj panting in the frame, sunlight filtering through the trees. The camera stopped clicking after that. Taj knew what happened. He saw everything. His owners bound, terrorized, murdered while he was helpless, maybe tied to a tree, maybe locked in the car. He carried that trauma for the rest of his life. He's gone now too, taking whatever he witnessed to the grave. The stream still flows in Shenandoah. The trails are still beautiful. Rangers will tell you the park is safe, and statistically it is. Millions visit without incident. But some campsites remember what happened there. The earth remembers blood. The trees remember screams. And somewhere in evidence storage, Julie and Lolly's case files sit alongside others. Unsolved disappearances, unexplained deaths, women who went camping and never came home. Leo Jackson's hunting ground was bigger than 2 victims. The investigation continues, and the trees keep their secrets until DNA makes them talk. When the hikers found the partially buried body on August 12, 2011, they knew immediately it wasn't an accident. The shallow grave, the missing gear, the deliberate attempt to hide what had been done to someone who trusted the wrong person on the trail. Scott Lilly, trail name Stonewall, was 30 years old from South Bend, Indiana. A Civil War buff, a gentle soul working through depression and personal struggles, hiking the Appalachian Trail from Maryland to Georgia as a form of therapy, a way to find himself. His pastor had introduced him to the trail, thought it would help. His family thought he was safe out there in the wilderness, away from the dangers of urban life, away from the things that had been weighing him down. They were wrong. The last confirmed sighting was July 31st at the Priest Shelter in Nelson County, Virginia. Scott had stayed there overnight, signed the trail register, chatted with other hikers about the beauty of the climb, the views from the summit. He'd been planning to hike 3.8 miles north to US Route 60, then hitch into Buena Vista for supplies, food, propane, maybe a shower and a hot meal at a diner. Standard thru-hiker resupply. He'd done it dozens of times before at other trail towns. He never made it to Route 60. Instead, his body turned up 2 weeks later near Cow Camp Gap Shelter, buried in a shallow grave just off the hotel trail. The trail is popular, a 5.8-mile loop easily accessible from nearby roads, used by day hikers and section hikers. Not remote, not isolated, not the kind of place you'd expect to find a murder victim. Which means his killer either didn't care about being seen, or knew exactly when the trail would be empty, knew the patterns, knew how to move unseen. The FBI was called in immediately. Special Agent Steve Watson led the investigation. They found over 100 pieces of evidence at the scene and along nearby trails. They interviewed 83 people across multiple states and 2 foreign countries, fellow hikers, trail angels, hostel owners, anyone who might have seen Scott between July 31st and August 12th. They covered 270 miles of trails, checking every shelter register, every trailhead camera, every lead. But here's what they didn't find: Scott's blue or purple backpack, the one other hikers would have recognized, his Ozark Trail hiking shoes, well-worn, distinctive, his propane camping stove, his Appalachian Trail handbook annotated with notes and sketches, a Nintendo DS game he carried for entertainment in shelters, most of his clothing. His body was stripped of gear so thoroughly it looked like robbery, but nothing valuable was actually taken, just the things that would identify him as a thru hiker, that would let him blend in on the trail. Think about what that means. The medical examiner's report was clear: asphyxia by suffocation. He was strangled, murdered, then partially buried about half a mile from the trail, 2.5 miles from the nearest road, in a location someone had to know about, someone who understood the area, someone who'd scouted it. Someone killed Scott Lilly and took their time doing it. Someone who knew the area well enough to bury him in a spot that wouldn't be immediately discovered. Someone who then carried his gear away, or worse, wore it, putting on Scott's identity like a costume, blending in as just another hiker on the trail. Think about that. Scott's killer might have walked past other hikers wearing Scott's backpack, his shoes, might have stayed in shelters, signed trail logs under a false name, shared meals around campfires with people who had no idea they were sitting across from a murderer. Might have accepted trail magic from kind strangers, accepted rides into town, accepted trust from a community built on trust. The Appalachian Trail community was shaken. For decades, the trail had been one of the safest places in America. Since 1974, only 11 hikers had been murdered on the entire 2,190-mile trail. It was statistically safer than any city. Solo hikers, especially women, had felt relatively secure because of the close-knit community, the constant flow of familiar faces, the trail angels, and shelter communities that looked out for each other. But Scott's murder changed that calculus. If someone could be strangled and buried on a popular trail section without anyone seeing anything, then nowhere was truly safe. The FBI looked at trail registers, talked to everyone known as Papa Smurf, a hiker of interest mentioned in online forums who'd been in the area around the same time. They checked every lead that came in after the $10,000 reward was offered. They investigated a known sex offender who'd been camping nearby. They looked at fellow thru hikers who'd left the trail abruptly around the time of Scott's death. Nothing stuck. No arrests, no suspect publicly named. Here's what terrifies me about this case, what keeps me up at night. The Appalachian Trail is built on trust. It has to be. You're out there for months, vulnerable, exhausted, dependent on the kindness of strangers. You share shelters with people you've just met. You accept rides from locals. You trust that the person hiking behind you isn't a threat. You trust that the community will protect you. But Scott's killer exploited that trust, got close enough to overpower him, not an easy feat as Scott was a fit 30-year-old man, close enough to strangle him without anyone hearing the struggle, close enough to steal his identity as a hiker and disappear into the very community Scott thought would keep him safe. Since 1974, only 11 hikers have been murdered on the Appalachian Trail over a 47-year period. Those statistics don't help Scott's family. They don't explain why their son, who was hiking to heal from depression, to find peace, to reconnect with himself, found a predator instead. They don't explain why his final journal entry, written at the priest's shelter, was so hopeful, talking about the beauty of the mountains, the kindness of fellow hikers, how much better he was feeling. The FBI says they haven't given up. Special Agent Watson still works the case when new leads come in. They're still hoping for that one call, that one tip, that breaks everything open. But it's been over 13 years now. Trails grow cold, memories fade, witnesses die or move on. The killer might be dead themselves by now, taking the truth to their grave. Or maybe they're still out there. Maybe they quit the trail after that, spooked by the investigation, by the attention. Maybe the guilt finally caught up. Or maybe, and this is the nightmare scenario, maybe they're still hiking, still blending in, still wearing someone else's gear, still waiting for the next isolated hiker who trusts too easily, who's hiking alone, who's vulnerable in just the right way. So if you're planning to hike the AT, be smart. Tell people your plans, check in regularly. Don't trust everyone you meet, no matter how friendly they seem. Don't share too much personal information in shelter registers. Don't hike alone if you can help it. And if something feels wrong, if someone gives you bad vibes, if a situation doesn't sit right, trust that instinct. Because somewhere between the priest shelter and cow camp gap, Scott Lilly trusted the wrong person. Maybe he accepted help with his gear. Maybe he shared a campfire. Maybe he thought he'd made a trail friend. And it cost him everything. Thank you for making it to the end. If you loved listening to the stories, please subscribe for new stories every week, shared by real people. Like and comment below to let me know which story terrified you the most. Thanks again for supporting the channel.